Just like with most CloverWorks shows, except for maybe Wonder Egg Priority, but they still kind of f***ed that one up, and it's an exception, not the rule. They've managed to present to us a fairly good show with a very likable cast of characters, especially EMILI-KO, the MC. She's a precious little cinnamon roll, with good animation and decent music. In the same vein as The Promised Neverland, it's a mystery show, but with a much more upbeat vibe because of EMILI-KO's nature. EMILI-KO is an absolute treat to watch on screen, and really, based just on her interactions with the other characters alone, the anime coasts at like a 6 out of 10. However, like most CloverWorks shows, it has the potential to be an 8 or a 9. As I said, it's a mystery show that's pretty good at laying out certain clues and getting you to think, but on the same hand, CloverWorks, for whatever king reason, spoils the plot for you in the first 2 minutes of the first episode. It, according to manga readers anyways, starts the show with a scene that happens way later in the manga, but then it proceeds to adapt everything as if it hadn't done that. And so a lot of these little clues that it lays down just fall flat and look dumb, because anyone with a brain can figure out the main mystery based off those opening minutes alone. If you watch this without using your brain, then yeah, sure, it's a really good show, but it's beyond me why anyone would watch a mystery show and not actively try to solve the mystery. That's like the whole fun of it and the point. It doesn't help either that when the show does introduce smaller mysteries into the show that don't have to deal with the main plot or only a piece of it so that you can think on it more, it almost always immediately exposits the reason why a character was doing something and thus solves the lesser mystery within the episode or within the next few minutes of the same goddamn episode. Because CloverWorks was probably worried that you might be enjoying yourself, and you know, now we can't have that in a CloverWorks show, silly. A good example of this is the soot that emits from the Shadow's head. Before you even have a chance to think about what causes it in episode 1, they immediately explain it. Now, that example isn't the best because it does linger just long enough to give them the benefit of the doubt, but in a much later episode where it's very clear that a character has it out for Kate, one of the other main characters and EMILI-KO's master, it only lets you wonder what that character's motivation could be for a few seconds before having the character in the next scene exposit in his head why he's doing what he's doing. Like, what the shit? It's like they just don't know how to set up a mystery at all. For whatever reason, they lay a lot of it out up front as though you'll get bored and frustrated immediately if you don't know what's going on. They insist on throwing things that were subtle in the manga right into your face in the anime, and it completely ruins the mystery and makes the rest of the show feel disjointed because they'll, for the most part, just adapt it one-to-one, despite the changes they make along the way that then make it impossible to adapt one-to-one, because the fact that they keep trying to do so after spoiling and explaining things to you just makes it fall flat and makes it boring because you already know what the character doesn't, and that isn't fun. You're just waiting on the character to catch up, which is super tedious. In episode 3 alone, the way the characters say stuff and the things that get introduced to you are supposed to make you wonder, like, I wonder how all this stuff works. But because they CloverWorksed it in the first episode, primarily in the first few minutes of the first episode, it just doesn't work anymore. Now, even though the studio spoils it for you, I'm not going to do the same here by giving you an in-depth recap of the show. So instead, I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible, and perhaps in another video once the season ends, I'll cover it with a complete in-depth spoiler review. Anyways, it's about living shadows who are cared for by living dolls, which are essentially humans, that have a similar appearance to them. We follow all of the different shadows and dolls, specifically the ones that have yet to debut, as the show calls it, but our main focus is on our lead EMILI-KO and her mistress and or shadow boss, Kate. The show revolves around A, how EMILI-KO interacts with her environment in a very bright way despite the nature of the show, while simultaneously beginning to slowly solve the mystery herself, and B, the mystery behind the Shadow's house and what exactly it is. Again, the latter is basically spoiled for you, but it doesn't completely ruin the show, as you can still theory craft about other things, and in general just enjoy EMILI-KO and the rest of the cast, because they are fantastic. It's an intriguing enough show on its own right, and its characters are well written, but in a season alongside Odd Taxi that does the mystery aspect so well when that technically even isn't its main focus, it just becomes very jarring that this show that is a mystery show, and that has a rather good and intriguing mystery at that, is actively ruined by the studio adapting it. And when you consider this is the same studio that adapted The Promised Neverland, both seasons, it doesn't give you much hope in a potential season 2 for the show, because we all know how that went for Promised Neverland. Still, the show isn't bad. It's just disappointing, like with most CloverWorks shows. They're very clearly shows that could be 8, 9s, hell, even 10s, but they just always are 6 or 7s because of the studio's odd adaptation style. Honestly, the Carl Jung reversal, where shadows have their own lights instead of the usual other way around, is interesting enough for a core concept, but then they take it a step further and layer a mystery on top of that, but then they still keep it lighthearted and fun in the form of EMILI-KO. It's also great at letting the soundtrack and mood just carry the scene when it wants to. It's like it's flexing on you, though it does have a tendency to then over-explain things, as I've already said, and completely ruin a scene, which again I can only assume is the result of CloverWorks, considering how frequently they do it in their other shows as well. I do not know why this studio manages to so consistently f up the shows that it produces. Honestly, there's not much else I have to say about this show without spoiling anything. Ironic, I know. So I'll just say it's a fun show with fun characters and a ruined mystery that brings it down a few points, but that doesn't detract from all the factors. The comedy, for example, that they decide to insert into the show every now and then, whether it be through character acting or somebody being an idiot, which is usually EMILI-KO, still manages to be funny and entertaining. Like I said, this show, so far anyway, is still a solid 7 out of 10, and it's one of the top 3 shows airing this season, alongside Odd Taxi at the top and Pretty Boy Detective sitting at number 2. So stop watching whatever garbage you're currently watching this season and pick this up instead. May EMILI-KO smile bless us. Until next time, see ya.